May 20, 1944. Fort Meade, New Jersey. Private First Class Arthur Shilstone stood in front of an inflatable Sherman tank, paintbrush in hand, adding rust streaks to the rubber canvas that was supposed to fool German reconnaissance pilots into believing they were looking at real American armor. The morning sun made the fake tank's surface hot to the touch. Someone had to paint realistic wear patterns onto these absurd props. Someone had to make inflatable rubber look like 30 tons of steel. Shilstone was an art student before the war. Cooper Union, class of 1942. He'd been studying commercial illustration when his draft notice arrived. Now he was assigned to the most peculiar unit in the entire United States Army, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. 1,000 men whose primary weapons were inflatable tanks, recorded sound effects, and theatrical props. His commanding officers called it tactical deception. His fellow soldiers had a different term for it. The Ghost Army. Around Shilstone, other men worked on their assigned illusions. Some erected fake radio antennas. Others assembled plywood artillery pieces that weighed less than 50 pounds but from the air looked exactly like 155 mm howitzers. A group of engineers inflated another rubber tank using portable air compressors that sounded like lawnmowers. The whole scene resembled a film set more than a military base. Which was precisely the point. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops had been assembled in secret during the winter of 1943. The unit's mission was unprecedented in American military history, to deceive the enemy through elaborate theatrical productions staged on actual battlefields. Create phantom armies that existed only in German intelligence reports. Make the Wehrmacht believe American divisions were positioned where no Americans actually stood. The men selected for this unit came from unusual backgrounds. Art students, sound engineers, advertising designers, radio operators, architects. The Army had combed through personnel records looking for soldiers with skills that had nothing to do with shooting rifles or throwing grenades. Skills like drafting, painting, carpentry, stagecraft, audio recording. Shilstone had been pulled from his infantry training company after a captain noticed his civilian occupation listed as commercial artist. He'd expected to be assigned to some propaganda unit designing posters. Instead, he found himself painting fake rust onto inflatable tanks. The equipment itself was remarkable in its absurdity. Full-scale inflatable tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, even airplanes. Each weighed between 50 and 100 pounds and could be inflated in 15 minutes. From the ground, they looked ridiculous, obvious fakes with their rubber skin and internal air bladders. But from 5,000 feet up, through the lens of a German reconnaissance camera, they looked exactly like the real thing. The unit also possessed an arsenal of sonic deception equipment. Enormous speakers capable of broadcasting recorded sounds across several miles. Recordings of tank engines starting, convoy movements, bridge construction, radio chatter in multiple languages. Engineers could create an audio landscape of a division-sized force moving through the countryside while only a handful of actual soldiers operated the equipment. Radio deception completed the illusion. Operators transmitted fake message traffic mimicking the communications patterns of real combat units. Created phantom command posts that existed only on German radio intercept maps. Fabricated entire divisions through nothing more than carefully scripted radio conversations between soldiers who never left their tents. The concept of tactical deception was not new. The British had pioneered it in North Africa, using dummy tanks and false radio traffic to mislead Rommel about Allied strength and intentions. The success of these operations convinced American commanders that deception could be weaponized as effectively as artillery. But the 23rd was something different. Larger. More ambitious. More theatrical. Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Simonson commanded the unit. A career officer with no background in theater or art but considerable experience in military planning and logistics. He understood that successful deception required more than clever props, it demanded perfect coordination with actual combat operations, precise intelligence about what the enemy was watching, and soldiers disciplined enough to maintain elaborate fictional scenarios even under fire. Simonson's executive officer was Major Ralph Ingersoll, a journalist before the war who'd edited Fortune magazine and knew something about selling stories to skeptical audiences. Together they assembled a command structure that read like the credits of a Broadway production. Captain George van der Sluis ran the camouflage engineers. He'd been a landscape architect who specialized in hiding things in plain sight, making industrial facilities blend into their surroundings, concealing military installations inside seemingly ordinary farmland. Now he applied those skills in reverse, making things visible that weren't really there. Major Ralph Tompkins commanded the Sonic Deception Company. Former radio engineer who understood how sound behaved over distance, how terrain affected audio propagation, how to make a recording of 10 tanks sound like 50. The men of the 23rd trained for months at Fort Meade. Learning to inflate rubber tanks in the dark. Practicing coordinated radio deception scripts. Studying aerial reconnaissance photographs to understand what German pilots would see from above. Running full-scale rehearsals where they created phantom divisions and tested whether anyone could distinguish fake from real. The results were mixed. Some rehearsals worked perfectly. An inflatable tank company positioned in a New Jersey field fooled Army Air Force reconnaissance pilots who swore they'd photographed an actual armor battalion. Radio deception exercises confused intelligence officers who couldn't determine which units were real and which existed only on the airwaves. Other attempts failed spectacularly. Inflatable tanks collapsed in high winds. Sound equipment malfunctioned during crucial demonstrations. Radio operators made scripting errors that revealed their transmissions as fake. But by May 1944, the unit was as ready as it would ever be. Operation Overlord, the invasion of Europe, was approaching. The largest amphibious assault in history. The success of the landing would depend partly on fooling the Germans about where and when it would occur. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops would play a supporting role in this deception. A minor part, perhaps. But the generals planning the invasion believed every advantage mattered. If inflatable tanks and recorded sound effects could tie down even a single German division away from the real invasion beaches, that might save hundreds of American lives. Shilstone finished painting rust onto the inflatable Sherman. Stepped back to examine his work. The effect was convincing, he had to admit. Up close, anyone could see it was fake. But viewed from a distance, the distance a German reconnaissance plane would maintain to avoid anti-aircraft fire, it looked real enough. He moved to the next tank in line. Started adding dirt weathering to its inflatable treads. Somewhere in England, American infantry divisions were boarding ships for the crossing to France. Real soldiers with real rifles preparing for real combat. Here at Fort Meade, the Ghost Army prepared for war of a different kind. They would not fire weapons. Would not capture objectives. Would not engage enemy forces. They would simply appear. And disappear. And reappear somewhere else entirely. The Germans would see them. Photograph them. Report them. Intelligence officers in Berlin would mark their positions on maps, estimate their strength, calculate when they might attack. And none of it would be real. The entire German war machine would be making decisions based on information that existed only in the imaginations of American artists and engineers. If it worked. June 15, 1944. 9 days after D-Day. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops crossed the English Channel on landing craft designed to carry tanks. But these craft held no armor. Just rubber, canvas, and the 1,000 men who would operate history's strangest weapons. Private Harold Dahl watched the French coastline emerge through morning fog as their landing craft approached Utah Beach. The invasion itself was over here. American forces had pushed inland, established beachheads, begun the difficult work of expanding Allied territory in Normandy. But the beach still showed scars. Wrecked landing craft sat half submerged in the surf. Shell craters pockmarked the sand. Burned-out German pillboxes lined the bluffs. The 23rd came ashore without incident. No enemy fire. No mines. Just the logistical chaos of thousands of tons of supplies moving through a contested port barely under Allied control. They unloaded their equipment under the curious eyes of combat soldiers who couldn't understand why anyone was bringing enormous rubber balloons onto a battlefield. Some infantry troops laughed when they saw the inflatable tanks being carried ashore by four-man teams. Others asked questions their commanders told them to ignore. Everything about the 23rd was classified. Secret. Their mission, their equipment, even their designation as a unit. The official cover story described them as a special engineering battalion. Anyone who saw their actual equipment and operations had to sign documents promising never to discuss what they'd witnessed. The unit moved inland to a staging area near Cherbourg. Set up camp. Waited for orders. Those orders came on June 23. Operation Elephant. Their first combat deception. The plan was straightforward in concept. The 23rd would impersonate the 2nd Armored Division, making the Germans believe that American armor was massing near Cherbourg for an attack toward the port city. Meanwhile, the real 2nd Armored was actually moving south toward St. Lo. The deception might draw German reserves north, away from the actual attack axis. Captain Fred Fox briefed the unit. He'd been an advertising designer in civilian life, spent his career making products appear more impressive than they actually were. Now he applied those skills to military deception. The operation would require total commitment to the illusion, Fox explained. Every detail had to be perfect. The inflatable equipment had to be positioned exactly where real armor would stage. Radio transmissions had to match the communication patterns of an actual armored division. Visual discipline had to be maintained, no soldier could be caught doing anything that would reveal the equipment as fake. Most importantly, they had to act like tankers. Walk like tankers. Talk like tankers. If any German agent was watching, and intelligence suggested several were operating in the area, they had to see American armor crews behaving exactly as armor crews behaved. The deception began on the night of June 24. Under cover of darkness, teams moved into position near the village of Torigny-sur-Vire. They'd chosen open fields visible from several German observation posts on nearby ridgelines. The enemy was watching this area. Good. Let them watch. The soldiers worked quickly. 4 men could inflate a Sherman tank in 15 minutes. They positioned each tank exactly where a real armor company would place it, dispersed for protection against artillery, angled for quick movement toward road networks, grouped in tactical formations that matched American doctrine. By dawn, what had been an empty field contained an entire tank battalion. 40 inflatable Shermans arranged in perfect company formations. From the German positions on the ridges, it looked like the 2nd Armored Division had arrived overnight. The sonic deception team added the audio component. Enormous speakers positioned in the tree line began broadcasting recorded sounds of tank maintenance. Engine tests. Track repair. Conversations between mechanics and drivers. The recordings had been made at actual tank units and captured every detail, specific engine notes, particular squeaking sounds certain tank models made, even the distinctive clang of wrenches dropped on steel hulls. Radio operators established their network. Began transmitting message traffic that matched 2nd Armored Division communication patterns. Used the division's call signs, frequencies, encryption protocols. Created radio conversations between tank company commanders coordinating maintenance schedules, fuel deliveries, ammunition requisitions. During daylight hours, soldiers walked between the inflatable tanks. Performed maintenance pantomimes on the rubber vehicles. Climbed in and out of them as if conducting crew drills. Several times each day, small groups gathered near specific tanks and appeared to hold tactical discussions, officers pointing at maps, NCOs taking notes, the kind of meetings that happen constantly in any armor unit preparing for combat. They even created traffic. Every few hours, a truck would drive between the dispersed tank positions following routes that looked like supply deliveries. Each truck was actually empty, but from the German observation posts, it appeared as though the American Armor Battalion was receiving regular resupply, the hallmark of a unit preparing for extended operations. The Germans watched. Reconnaissance flights photographed the tank positions. Artillery observers on the ridges noted the American armor in their reports. Radio intercept stations recorded the 2nd Armored Division communications coming from the area. German intelligence assessed the information. Marked the American armor position on their situation maps. Calculated threat vectors. Estimated when the attack toward Cherbourg might begin. Reserved 2 panzer battalions in the area to counter the American armor when it moved. None of it was real. The tank battalion the Germans were photographing existed only in inflatable rubber. The radio communications they were intercepting came from soldiers sitting in tents, reading scripts. The tactical preparations they were observing were pure theater performed by artists and engineers. Operation Elephant continued for 4 days. On June 28, the real 2nd Armored Division attacked towards St. Lo, 40 miles south of where the Germans thought American armor was positioned. German reserves rushed south to meet the threat, but the delay cost them crucial hours. The defensive positions they'd prepared near Cherbourg remained manned, waiting for an American armor attack that would never come. The 23rd deflated their rubber tanks. Packed the equipment. Moved to their next assignment. The deception had worked perfectly. German after-action reports captured later showed that Wehrmacht intelligence had never questioned the accuracy of their reconnaissance. Their maps showed American armor at Torigny-sur-Vire for 4 days in late June 1944. They never realized they'd been watching theatrical props operated by soldiers whose primary weapon was imagination. This was just the beginning. September 14, 1944. Luxembourg. Sergeant Victor Dowd stood inside a command post tent listening to Lieutenant Colonel Simonson brief the next operation. This would be bigger than anything they'd attempted before. More complex. More dangerous. Operation Bettembourg. The real 5th Armored Division was moving south toward the German border. The 23rd would impersonate them, creating the illusion that American armor remained near Luxembourg City while the actual division redeployed. The deception might confuse German intelligence about American strength and intentions long enough for the 5th Armor to reach attack positions undetected. But this operation came with a significant problem. German forces controlled observation posts within rifle range of where the 23rd would deploy. The enemy was close. Very close. Close enough to see details. Close enough to shoot if they suspected something unusual was happening. The margin for error had disappeared. Dowd had been with the unit since its formation. He'd participated in a dozen deceptions across France. Seen what worked and what didn't. This operation worried him more than any previous mission. They moved into position on the night of September 15. The assigned location was an open valley 3 miles south of Luxembourg City. German forces held the eastern ridgeline. American infantry held the western ridge. Between them, the valley floor would become home to a phantom armored division. The work began after midnight. Teams spread across the valley in darkness, inflating tanks, positioning artillery pieces, erecting radio antennas. They worked silently, trying not to create any sound that might attract German attention. The nearest enemy positions were only 800 meters away. By dawn, the valley contained an entire armored combat command. 60 inflatable tanks. 24 rubber artillery pieces. Command post tents. Radio masts. Supply dumps constructed from painted canvas stretched over wooden frames. Then the sun rose. And the Germans started watching. Dowd could see enemy observers on the eastern ridge through binoculars. German soldiers studying the American positions. Taking notes. Occasionally pointing at specific vehicles or installations. Were they suspicious? Had they noticed something wrong? At this distance, could they distinguish rubber from steel? The 23rd maintained their illusion through discipline. Soldiers walked between tanks following paths that matched normal traffic patterns in an armor unit. Supply trucks drove careful routes as if delivering fuel and ammunition. Officers gathered for visible command meetings. Everything choreographed to appear natural. The sonic deception team faced the biggest challenge. German positions were close enough to hear differences between recorded sounds and actual tank engines. The speakers had to be positioned carefully, volume calibrated precisely. Too loud and the Germans might notice the sound didn't quite match what they were seeing. Too quiet and the illusion would lack necessary realism. Master Sergeant Walter Arnett, a former radio sound effects engineer, spent hours adjusting speaker placement. He'd created many of the recordings himself, spent weeks at actual armor units capturing tank sounds with professional equipment. He knew exactly how a Sherman engine sounded at idle, under load, during maintenance. He knew which sounds carried over distance and which got absorbed by terrain. He positioned 3 large speakers in the tree line. Began playing the maintenance sequence. Tank engine starting. Running for a few minutes. Shutting down. Starting again. The normal sounds of a unit performing necessary mechanical work after movement. The Germans listened. Radio operators transmitted continuous message traffic. Not just scripted conversations but complete operational communications mimicking everything a real armor command would broadcast. Supply requests. Maintenance reports. Personnel movements. Security check-ins. The volume of traffic matched a full combat command, dozens of transmissions per hour on multiple frequencies. German radio intercept units recorded everything. On September 17, a German patrol probed the valley. 8 soldiers moving through drainage ditches toward the American positions. They got within 300 meters of the nearest inflatable tank before American infantry units on the western ridge drove them back with machine gun fire. Had the patrol been trying to verify what German observers were seeing? Or was it routine reconnaissance? Either way, the patrol's rapid retreat suggested they hadn't gotten close enough to detect the deception. The operation continued for 9 days. During that time, German intelligence reports consistently showed the 5th Armored Division positioned near Luxembourg City. Wehrmacht commanders planned defensive operations assuming American armor remained in place. Allocated reserves to counter the threat they believed was present in the valley. Meanwhile, the real 5th Armored Division was 70 miles away, attacking toward the German border. On September 24, the 23rd received orders to withdraw. The real 5th Armored had reached its objectives. The deception was no longer necessary. Teams deflated the rubber equipment under cover of darkness. Packed everything onto trucks. By morning, the valley was empty except for the tracks that tank treads would have left in the mud, tracks the 23rd had carefully created using specially designed rollers. German observers on the eastern ridge reported that the American armor had withdrawn during the night. Intelligence officers in Berlin updated their maps accordingly. Noted the movement. Attempted to calculate where the American division had redeployed. They never realized the armor division they'd been watching for 9 days had never actually existed. The pattern repeated across France and into Germany. Operation Wiltz in September. The 23rd impersonated the 6th Armored Division near the Luxembourg-German border. Operation Casanova in October. They created a Phantom Infantry Division near Metz. Operation Koblenz in March 1945. A massive deception involving multiple Phantom divisions across a 50-mile front along the Rhine River. Each operation grew more sophisticated. The soldiers learned from experience what worked and what didn't. Which details German observers noticed and which they ignored. How to maintain illusions under increasingly dangerous circumstances. They operated within artillery range of German positions. Set up deceptions in areas the Luftwaffe still occasionally patrolled. Created phantom armies while real combat raged just miles away. And it worked. Post-war interrogation of German officers revealed that Wehrmacht intelligence had never detected the 23 RD's operations. Never realized they'd been tracking phantom divisions. Never understood that significant portions of their intelligence regarding American force dispositions had been completely fictional. German commanders had made strategic decisions based on information provided by the Ghost Army. Allocated reserves to counter threats that didn't exist. Weakened actual defensive positions to reinforce areas where they believed American forces were massing, areas where nothing existed except inflatable rubber and recorded sound effects. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops conducted 21 major tactical deceptions between June 1944 and May 1945. Historians later estimated these operations tied down 10 to 15 German divisions at various points in the campaign. Divisions that could have been deployed against actual American offensives but instead waited to defend against phantom threats. How many American soldiers lived because German reserves were misdirected by inflatable tanks? Impossible to calculate. But the commanders who authorized the Ghost Army's operations believed the unit's contribution was significant. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, later wrote that tactical deception had been invaluable to the European campaign. That the phantom armies created by the 23rd had consistently diverted enemy attention from actual operations. For the soldiers of the Ghost Army, combat meant something different than what their infantry brothers experienced. They fought with rubber and paint and recorded sound. Their weapons were imagination and attention to detail. Their enemy was not German soldiers but German intelligence officers who studied photographs and listened to radio intercepts and tried to understand American intentions. It was a strange war they fought. Bloodless. Theatrical. Utterly unlike the combat happening in every other sector of the front. But it was war nonetheless. And they won. April 30, 1945. Outside Munich. Private First Class Shilstone stood in a muddy field deflating his last rubber tank. The war in Europe was ending. German resistance was collapsing. Hitler was dead. The Third Reich had days, perhaps hours remaining. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was being deactivated. Their mission completed. Their equipment would be destroyed, most of it, anyway. Some pieces would be saved for military museums, though exactly when those museums would be allowed to acknowledge the Ghost Army's existence remained unclear. Everything the unit had done was classified top secret. All personnel had signed documents promising never to discuss their wartime service. The operations, the equipment, the techniques, all of it had to remain hidden. The Army wanted to preserve the capability for future conflicts. If potential enemies learned how tactical deception worked, it would lose effectiveness. So the soldiers of the 23rd went home with their secrets locked away. They returned to civilian life unable to tell anyone, family, friends, future employers, what they had actually done during the war. When asked about their service, they gave vague answers. Special unit. Engineering work. Can't talk about it. Some struggled with the secrecy. Jack Macy had been a camouflage artist with the unit. After the war, he became a successful industrial designer. But he couldn't include his wartime work in his portfolio. Couldn't cite it as experience. Couldn't even acknowledge it existed. Others found the secret comforting. Bill Blass had been an artist with the 23rd. He went on to become one of America's most famous fashion designers. But he rarely discussed his military service. When pressed, he'd mention that he'd been in Europe. Did some design work. Nothing more. The secret held for 31 years. In 1976, a researcher named Jack Neese was investigating military deception operations. He'd heard rumors about a special unit that used inflatable tanks during World War II. Most people told him he was chasing myths. Such things didn't really exist. But Neese persisted. Found declassified documents that mentioned the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Tracked down veterans who'd served in the unit. Slowly convinced them to share their stories. In 1985, the Army declassified most of the Ghost Army's records. Not everything, some techniques remained classified. But enough became available for historians to finally understand what the 23rd had accomplished. The veterans began talking publicly for the first time. Gave interviews. Wrote memoirs. Described operations they'd carried out 4 decades earlier. Rick Bayer, a documentary filmmaker, became fascinated with the Ghost Army story. Spent years researching the unit, interviewing surviving veterans, assembling the fragmented historical record. In 2013, he produced a full documentary that brought the 23RD's story to public attention. The surviving veterans were in their 80s and 90s by then. Many had passed away never having told anyone, not even their children, what they'd done during the war. Harold Dahl attended a screening of Bayer's documentary in 2013. He watched scenes depicting operations he'd participated in. Saw recreations of the inflatable tanks he'd deployed in French fields. Heard historians describe the Ghost Army's impact on the war. After the screening, someone asked if he'd ever felt that his wartime service was less important than what infantry soldiers experienced. Less dangerous. Less meaningful. Dahl considered the question carefully before answering. He said that every soldier who served contributed in different ways. Infantry troops captured territory. Artillery units provided fire support. The Ghost Army provided deception. Each role was necessary. Each saved lives through different methods. He said he'd been proud to serve in a unit that required creativity rather than violence. That had saved lives by preventing combat rather than winning it. And he noted something historians often overlooked. The Ghost Army had operated within enemy artillery range for months. German shells had landed near their positions regularly. Several men from the unit had been wounded. One, Private John Baumgartner, had been killed by German fire during a deception operation near Metz. The Ghost Army wasn't completely bloodless. The danger had been real. The contribution had been significant. The Pentagon finally acknowledged this in 2022, when Congress authorized the award of the Congressional Gold Medal to the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. It was one of the highest civilian honors the United States government could bestow. By then, fewer than 10 veterans of the unit remained alive. They were centenarians. Men in their late 90s who'd kept secrets for 7 decades. During the award ceremony, one of the surviving veterans, Bernie Bluestein, aged 99, described what it meant to finally be recognized. He said that for most of his life, people had thought he'd spent the war doing something trivial. Engineering work. Support duties. Nothing important. He'd never been able to explain that he'd participated in operations that diverted entire German divisions. That his work painting realistic where patterns onto rubber tanks had convinced enemy intelligence analysts they were looking at real armor. Now, finally, people understood. The Ghost Army had fought a different kind of war. Used different weapons. Achieved victory through imagination rather than firepower. But it had been just as real. Just as important. Just as worthy of recognition. The inflatable tanks are gone now. Destroyed or rotting in military warehouses. The sound recordings have been digitized, preserved in military archives. The radio scripts are classified documents stored in secure facilities. But the legacy remains. Modern military forces still use tactical deception. More sophisticated techniques than inflatable tanks, certainly. Digital deception, cyber operations, information warfare. But the principle remains unchanged: make the enemy believe something false, then exploit that false belief. The Ghost Army proved that deception could be weaponized as effectively as artillery. That illusion could shape battlefield outcomes as decisively as actual combat power. They proved that war is not only about violence. Sometimes it's about perception. About making your enemy see what you want them to see while keeping the truth hidden. They proved that artists and engineers could serve their country as effectively as infantry troops. That creativity could be as valuable as courage. The 1,000 men of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops never fired weapons in anger. Never captured enemy positions. Never engaged German forces in direct combat. They simply appeared. And disappeared. And reappeared somewhere else entirely. The Germans saw them. Photographed them. Tracked them. Made decisions based on their supposed presence. And none of it was real. The entire German war machine spent 11 months making strategic and tactical decisions based on information that existed only in the imaginations of American artists, engineers, and soldiers. They mocked the dummy army when they first heard rumors about it. They never realized those dummies had helped win the war.